Unfortunately, all these technical like challenges with a laptop I don't control mean that I end up just trying to fix it in the mix, and that only works
Hey,
so far.
JM, this is not the only thing that you don't control.
Wow. Are we getting into some philosophy here, Roland? All
Yes,
we can
yes.
control is the self. We cannot control the other.
I,
Interesting.
I show you my couch and then I'll charge you about $200 an hour, for the session.
Now we're like the process philosophers, but instead we're the process psychologists. I
Yeah.
get it. I get it.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. I'm excited. We're in 2025 now, solidly, and finally recording some podcasts that I want to get out there. There's so many exciting trends, ideas, people, sort of new developments in the process space, process and architecture space that are like driving forward thought leadership and innovation. But we haven't had a chance to speak to them yet. So I've got some exciting guests lined up, and you've got some exciting guests lined up, and man, I'm just excited to get going.
And I thought they were both of our guests. So are we
Wow.
divorcing JM? Is that the breaking news of this
No, 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 no,
episode
no.
now?
We're bringing together from our background and perspective the kinds of people we want to talk to, and I'm excited. We're sharing the ideas with each other and with the marketplace, and that's to all of the folks out there watching this podcast. And if you've enjoyed so far, this season's such an exciting lineup, ready to rock for talking about 2025 and beyond trends and exciting topics.
Yeah, and we have a new thing going on. I don't know if we can keep the streak because today our guest today is wearing pink, and we've seen that with the last episode with Hanneke, who wore pink as well. So I like to welcome Leslie Robinet
Thank
to
you.
the show. And Leslie, welcome. And we will talk about EA, the discipline, and where it goes. And I know you have some very interesting ideas about that. So I'm really looking forward to it. But before
Thanks.
we get started, Leslie, talk a little bit about yourself. Who are you? And it's a shame that not everybody knows you. So take this as an opportunity to get people familiar with you.
Thanks, sure. So I'm Leslie Robinet, but I haven't always been a Robinet. Half my life I was in the States, so I'm an American, but now I'm dual national. And lived the second half of my life here in Paris. And I have a background in industrial systems engineering. Did kind of my first professional experiences more around process optimization, simulation, actually in emergency room contexts that has stuck with me even years later. I thought it was a fascinating experience. Um, what else about me? So I'm a mom of 3 kids. I'm also the youngest of 3. So 3's a nice number, I guess.
I see a pattern
and
evolving.
huh?
I see a pattern evolving. So JM, our next
It's
guest needs to wear pink too. So 3 in a row.
And have
well, I
four
like
and have 4
color.
kids, and
I like
yeah.
color. What is it with you guys in your black and gray? Come on, get on
Ah,
with
Well,
it.
well,
here's the thing: the black doesn't show the stains as easily. So if you're eating a
Uh,
delicious food that is greasy, the black conceals.
well, Paris is beautiful all the time, but it's pretty gray in the winter. So yeah, I have to bring the
Mm.
color when the color's not coming to me. And on like I guess a personal hobby side, I'm really passionate about sustainable development. So in my personal life, personal side, I guess I run the associative activities around that, things with the community, and at work, it's also one of the hats that I wear. So I practice kind of a purposeful simplicity or joy from simplicity. I don't know how you would put words on it. And zero waste with our family, which I guess is not very typically American, but what you gonna do?
oh, there's also other things, when I moved to the US, we have some nice cities here, Front Royal, how you would pronounce it, and then the locals just call it Front Royal. It's like, I had to adapt a little bit. But then obviously we have beautiful shops here like Target and Walmart. So we can go there as well.
Lovely.
Yeah, lovely.
Well, I mean, listen, it's good to hear that you're zero waste, and that's I mean, obviously, we talk about a lot about the things that are causing structural and environmental issues as a result of some of the technology development. But I mean, there's also personal choices you can make, and it seems like you've decided some really sustainable lifestyle choices.
Well, yeah, sustainability is really important to me, and I think that it really fits together with a systemic view, with a kind of it's a way that I function even when I was growing up, kind of taking a step back and seeing how things are connected to each other, the influence they have one to another. So this isn't new, but yeah, there's some preoccupations that are a little bit more apparent now for some. But I don't look at it just as an environmental angle, but also people. And so when I'm taking a look back in an organization or into enterprise architecture, I'm taking the same approach to that, which is how can we put in place things that are going to last, that are going to work for the people who are involved in them, direct and indirect stakeholders, that we're going to be able to achieve and be resilient in the long term. So it just makes sense to me. And yeah, so I try to apply that kind of at home and at work as much as I can.
Yeah, and speaking of work, yeah, you're playing a crucial role in one of the major vendors in the EA space. You know, can you talk a little bit about that to bridge the gap to the topic that we're going to talk about?
Sure. I have been working with the company called Mega International, now called Mega a biz design company, because we are combined companies recently, and I've got a professional career with Mega for 19 years now, and was able to evolve a lot. Mostly spending that time working directly with customers, that were setting up or resuscitating their EA or GRC initiatives, so governance, risk, and compliance. And I absolutely adored working in services. I think it's a really valuable experience and got to see a lot of different contexts. But I do admit I had a personal attachment to the public sector, to regions and departments and public service, to just make the money that we're putting into the government work as efficiently and get the best outcomes possible. So, uh, but for the past couple of years for the company, and now for a larger spread of coverage for the company, I've also carried something I take dear to heart, which is a topic around harmonizing methodologies and best practices, knowledge management, um, important key topics like how do we onboard partners, internal collaborators, but also onboard our customers. So, what information do we need when? How are we being sure that, for example, the software product and the actual services delivery, or the use of that, that the loop is being closed back, that it's qualitative. So I love doing transversal work. I think I was born to do these topics. To be in EA, to be in kind of cross-functional implications, and it's really connected with my values about connecting people and connecting things and looking at things with a big picture view between the different departments that each have their own mandate and that they can optimize and do awesome because they're experts. But how are we making sure that all that together is coherent and again is qualitative?
And that's something that I talk about a lot as well. And happy to find somebody aligned with that, which is being excellent at a single thing, a single pillar, isn't the whole point, right? The whole
Mm,
point is to create a collective offering, something that people can put their hands on, can feel, can
mm,
provide value. Because being excellent is really important, but being excellent together is what we need to be
absolutely.
successful. And I love that. I love that. I think we're pretty aligned, and which brings us nicely to today's topic,
Mm.
because in the notes we sort of tentatively put this as the words unlimited EA, and that begs the very first question, of course, which is what limits EA, and why do we need to look at EA differently? So let's start our very first conversation around the concept of a limited scope EA,
Okay.
where it came from, and what are some pitfalls that it introduces into the ecosystem of enterprise architecture and business improvement.
Okay. Just before I dive into that, just a last remark about what we were just talking about in the company is that I think that the what makes this particularly interesting is the driver of the transformation that's occurring because of positive opportunity and disruption. And it really is neat to experience that from the inside, because I've accompanied lots of other companies from the outside, as how, again, different triggers. So for some of those companies, that might have been compliance, it might have been a merger and acquisition, it might have been a financial driver, but there's something that said, ooh, we need to do EA. And then that's where it starts to get interesting, is saying, how do they transform those triggers into how they're going to set up their EA practice and where they're going to go with it. So when you're talking about limited EA, is that it's not trying to be negative or saying, oh, it's bad. Just sometimes that I see that the initial request generated a quite small initial answer that was like, okay, we have this problem and then we need to answer it like there's a beginning and a middle and an end. So some of these kind of EA answers that were just a moment in time, okay, but without really a vision of what is going to happen after we've answered to this. Oh, compliance said you don't have your processes described, so okay, let's describe them all, and then what? Okay, so I find that's the first limiting factor, is a factor of time, where EA is taken on as something that you just need to do and then it's done. And then there's not an organization that's put around, or a perspective that's put around what might come next, and maybe how they could take this opportunity, which seems like a constraint, and turn it into something positive for the organization. So that's like the first, really, I guess, message I would get across, is don't fall into that short-term, short-visioned, just the end of your nose kind of view of, we have this problem and now we need to quickly deal with that, instead of saying, what could we be doing structurally?
I think one thing that we should state for the obvious, is your perspective of EA, because you mentioned, for example, process, and a lot of people just think about EA, but that's that IT stuff, cable and boxes and apps, and that's not the case. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you have a different perspective on that.
Yes, totally. Yeah, if we come back to values and way of seeing the world, well, I've always kind of had a more of a holistic view, and then I was delighted to discover when I got my industrial systems engineering degree that you can learn about systems thinking. That there's actually like a there's things that happen behind there, and you can model processes, you can model applications, you can model strategy, you can create like a digital twin of reality, which is complex and not easy, and you can use that image, that reflection of the reality, to really do a lot of things, okay, and understanding data and understanding risk. Okay, so um, I feel I've continued to kind of carry that as I chose to work for a company that I've stayed with a long time, because I wanted to be somewhere where a holistic vision to EA was just the way things are done here. So that is a total principle that I am aligned to. And when I say a holistic, it's just that we're going beyond, as far as scope is concerned. We're saying that EA can be the connection maker of the company, and that's where the power relies. That's like earlier when I was talking about being so motivated in my transversal role. It's for that, also that purpose. Okay, so being able to connect the business architecture, the application architecture, the data architecture, but also operational risks that could prevent us from doing all those things that we really want to do through those different vectors, and the different kind of views of the organization. So it's a 360 collective view that you can only get if you're taking those different angles.
And I like that perspective because you're playing the role of the connection maker, right? And one thing that I learned in my way too many years in that field is it's the damn people, right? We're not talking about the repository or apps or technology or whatever. We're talking about people, right? And I think it's very crucial to play that role that you're playing, to be the connection maker between those different areas.
I've seen some debates sometimes that I think are interesting, on social media and things like that, where they're saying, oh, it's super determinant for the success of EA in a company where it's positioned in the org chart. Like, oh, is this in process excellence department, or is this in a strategy department, or is this in a compliance department? But in the end, I've found that even if those are very interesting and might add a little tint to the way that they're going about, what's the most important is afterwards the leadership that's put behind and how the person carries that mandate, how the team carries that mandate, and their capacity to go and implicate themselves, sometimes knock on doors where they weren't invited, and be proactive, to the to gain that influence and gain that trust and build on it in the company. So you really, in the end, transversal is just that. It's just you could come in one side or in the other. And where I've seen EA not be limited, are places where people were willing to go out, and connect with those other departments and those other people and other stakeholders to say, you have information that would help us, and we have information that can help you. And together, we can do a lot more. Together, we're stronger. So,
But it's also a long time running problem that I see, the maturity of the discipline, because I think if you do it right, guess what? You provide the information basis for every decision that you want to do when you change your operating model or whatever, because you need to know where you are before you can determine where you want to go, or realistically determine where you
mm,
want to go. And most people don't have that. They just, as you said, they pigeonhole that discipline into some area of the organization, in most cases IT, right? And
mm, mm.
no shade on that, but who takes IT serious nowadays when you can swipe your credit card and get your private AI, shadow IT,
Or when
whatever,
some people in the
you
business
know?
can just go subscribe to a new SaaS app or use something without even
Yeah,
informing IT about it, and kind of do
yeah.
how they want to. So, that's an interesting topic around, the role of IT and the way that they can be really involved in the other, aspects of the organization when it comes to strategy and the business needs, and to be involved and aware. Well, that's again a people topic.
Yeah, and I feel like we have to always justify the existence. It's like you have to keep reproving the value because for a lot of people, they don't intuitively understand what EA provides. They're
Mm.
they're being convinced and convinced over and over again, even when they see the evidence, even when their previous organizations had to go through this exact same process. It feels like we keep having to convince them to do the right
But we
thing.
need to be patient, and we need to talk in layman's terms and talk to the way the person is that's in front of us, the way they're going to understand. What are they going to
Yeah,
get out of it? What is the company going to get out of it? What's the risk to not do it? And it's when we talk about what's the point of EA, what's the point of a wider, more holistic EA, and even when I'm having coming back to that personal passion for sustainability, when I'm trying to convince someone, not necessarily someone, but talking about what's the point of sustainable considerations, in the end you just have to be patient
yeah,
and use the right words and say it again and again.
I don't know. I do this for almost 30 years, right? And I got the
Mm.
gray hairs to prove it. And patience runs out, I haven't seen a lot of progress made, right? It was always a niche topic. And I'm just wondering, is it a branding issue? Is it a being more brave and just say, we want to have a seat at the table? Is it
That's
the
interesting.
inability to show success? Oh, and by the way, what does success mean? Right? I think this is what holds the discipline back. This is where I think, and JM knows it, I'm absolutely not a fan of the distinction between BPM and EA, EA as IT,
sure, sure,
architecture
yeah,
manager.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
in my mind, it's the same. But this is where the BPM folks, who also split into process automation and business architect, blah, where they're successfully because you can see how things change. Your production line changes. You
Mm.
pump out widgets at the end of it. You underwrite more contracts, whatever. But the other views of an architecture, who cares? Hey, we don't have 500 applications. We just have 495. Good job, Leslie. So what is it? What is it that you have to change to bring the value to it?
Mm. No, that's really true. It's related back to how you manage the communication. And again, what's the point of removing those five apps? Is it then you
Mhm.
have more budget and energy and people and means to focus on being more innovative and making space for creativity and answering to the market. Because if you're filling up all that space to maintaining things that weren't bringing value, and we proved you that it didn't bring value because we reached out to you, business owner, we looked out to you and said, evaluate this business application. Is it, what level of value is it bringing to you? And then we considered that. We didn't just look at IT cost. We considered your feedback. And so that's what I'm pulling back to the people topic and about limited EA and being less limited. So part of the being less limited is involving stakeholders in a more significant way. And and one of those, I mean, I really like the idea of assessment because it also makes less of a static EA. Okay, so when static is just a, we describe something, okay, it's there. But when you're looking back to like different capacities to check, is this really the way we want it to be? Maybe we want something different. And is it the way we really think it is? So those two things are kind of like in the checking phase. You can be monitoring, is the reality like my imagined view, but also getting the again the feedback from from the IT department, the IT owner, about the reliability and the technical robustness, or from when you're doing risk assessments, or when you're doing an assessment on how quality the control is in place to mitigate those risks. So assessments are really a strong mechanism to involve the stakeholders, but also to get a better view of what's really going on with what you have. In addition to more technical approaches that might be like process monitoring or scanning. You can do there's a lot of tools out there and add-ons and things that are really interesting to do that cross reality with vision, and then make a plan. Those are, it's really good for process compliance and even data governance. But I think that beyond technical mechanisms, you need to be soliciting the people that are involved, so then they're going to be more on board afterwards when you say it won't be fun, but we're going to have to migrate this to something else, but it's because your feedback said that and we listen to you.
There's a cultural element here too, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned about reaching out to people. If you're looking to do assessments, everyone hates being assessed. It's not a fun topic for conversation. Hey, I'm going to come in and like check your work essentially, or to come back and do a reassessment of my understanding. But in that process, I'm going to consume your resources. I'm going to uncover the structural problems with the way you've implemented things or the way you're operating your business. Like you need to have a culture of grace
Mm,
around that, and
yeah.
that starts with trust, it follows with value, and then it concludes with acceptance. But that's a change management thing.
Yes.
It's also like a political conversation that has to happen at an executive level to set the standard. My
Mm.
question to you is, when you go into organizations where you don't see that kind of grace as a norm, what people do you talk to, what questions do you ask, and how do you start to shift that conversation to one of a more open organization? Like, you see the Jim Whitehurst description of an open organization. How do you get there?
You can't, as an external party, which most of my life I've been an external party, I have to accept my limits in intervening into an organization, that there's things they're going to have to take ownership for. And I can make recommendations, but in the end, they need to, take a hold of their leadership and of the mandate that they're giving people and the ownership that they put behind, their process owners, their app owners, their portfolio owners, the governance that they put around the topics that are connected to EAs. So I can't change that for them, unfortunately.
I think the point that you're making is, well, what's the perspective, the forward-looking thing that you bring to the table, right? And how can the role as an architect evolve to bring this forward-looking things in there? So, what are your thoughts on that? Where do you see the? Well, I think we spoke about the gap, but where do you see the path forward for architects?
Well, part of what architects can do to help bring the perspective is first of all, to not just document the way things are, but try to support documenting the way that we'd like them to be, and then help to trace the path to get there through transformation scenarios, through that you don't just say, okay, nice A and B, here's the line, but what kind of considerations are we putting behind those scenarios? So it's that's where you need to help with the kind of looping back to the strategy of the company. So the kind of the reason to be, the capability map, the key value streams, saying how can we serve those with the target that we're looking for, and therefore what things should we be considering. And yeah, cost is a part of that. It's really helpful if you consider risks in that too, because it's not just about what we have right in front of us, but what things that might happen, risks and opportunities. And then also, are these decisions something that are viable in the long term when it comes to our resources, and resources that aren't only financial. That's one approach, is through transformation scenarios. Um, another way to look forward is simulating. Simulating allows to take the possible changes and then see what happens if we do this. So that's one of the strengths of having a digital twin, is to be able to. I mean, the the first is a direct value of having visibility, which is a big step for a lot of organizations. But then from that, we can say, this is what this could look like. This can even make a culture shift and make a vision shift for the people that got to mobilize around making it come to be. You know, so that's a really strong lever.
When you talk about the idea of a holistic view, now
Hmm.
you're trying to bring a bunch of different levers together to form a picture that you can act on, right? And
Hmm.
you talked about a couple of words like digital twin and things like that. How do you encourage organizations when you take a look, once again, we talked about this before, the excellence at an individual level to excellent as an organizational level? How do you encourage a holistic view by presenting some of the value points and some of the pain points? So distill down to me the why when you talk to a CIO that they would engage in this approach.
An easy starting point, which is a good starting point to get quick results and make some sense, is application portfolio management, because there's usually some cost wins. It does bring that visibility on a consolidated inventory, which is already a real task. I mean, that's not easy. Um, but if we stay in just that zone, there's this risk that, again, that IT might not be prioritizing what's the most important for the business, or getting the recognition that it needs and the influence that it needs. So uh, it's really important to make sure that the backbone on which you're going to build the rest of this kind of broader or deeper EA, that backbone is in place. And that backbone for me is the capability map, which is the reason to be for the company, which doesn't just include the technical capabilities, which might be what comes first if you just talked about an APM initiative where you're just thinking about, oh, functional coverage of my apps, but really a more also kind of a realization, vision behind, what are we here to do, and then the processes that are going to realize those, the apps that are going to realize those, or the application systems that are going to realize those. So for me, that's an important backbone. And if from that, that's already one step forward
Yeah.
around this inventory that you would have. Okay, a next interesting step is the ownership that goes in front of, so behind these applications, a technical owner and kind of a business owner that
Hmm.
then allow you to be implicating them in the initiative, and then going beyond just what functional coverage this business application has, but what process is it serving.
Yeah.
um, when it comes to, I mean, there's a lot of data driven topics right now, compliance topics in some parts of the world,
Hmm.
secure IT security topics, also preparing move to clouds on a lot of apps, because that's interesting financially for companies for
Hmm.
managing the recurring and fixed cost. So to manage that, you also need to manage the data underneath. So going relating what data your applications are manipulating, what data your processes are manipulating, well, that lets you do a more full impact analysis to accompany, again, a movement. So again, that's a perspective. That's not a where we're at, it's where the whole company wants to go. That lets us progress on our cloud strategy, that lets us progress on our process digitalization, that lets us again make space for innovation, because in our sector there's a lot of competition about bringing a different user experience, and you have to have space for that, to
Yeah.
study that, to prep that with regards to your existing bricks. So again, in the along all of these different layers, there's a consideration that I would really like to see more of, which is also risk management, risk and controls, action plans, follow-ups.
Hmm.
I know audit sounds like a scary word, but even the audits behind those, it's going to
It
make the
is
company more
scary.
resilient.
Yeah.
But it's shifting a culture. It's we want to shift to an EA culture and to a risk-aware culture, which is again behind risk. You also have opportunity. And if we don't think about it, it's much, much more costly than if we, with the fines that we might be getting
Oh
and
yeah.
just pretty much closing our doors if an organization doesn't prevent them and mitigate them and prepare for them and get responsibility around them. Well, yeah, it's not a smart middle term, long term approach.
You just had a very wide perspective of everything, which I love, right? So don't get me wrong, but I can
Okay.
imagine that now the brains of our listeners are burning. So I like to take a little
Okay.
break, right?
Mm.
And give
Okay.
our listeners a little pause on
Sure.
thinking about that. But before we continue with the second segment of the show, which is a little bit more how to ish, I like to ask our audience a question. If you are in the situation that you have an EA group or process group or whatever, right? How do you use them today? One of the stuff that Leslie spoke about, to make it unlimited, is what you see or don't see in your organization, and how do you make a difference for your organization? And with that, we'll leave you for a moment and we come back with Leslie and JM and myself for the second segment.
And we are back, folks. This is a fantastic discussion so much, Leslie. I really enjoyed it. The last thing you talked about before we took a break was about asking hard questions. And those hard questions lead us necessarily to the how, right? Because the questions are the first part of the conversation. Tell me a little bit more in specifics on how you ask these questions, what questions you're looking to ask, and how you lead that into a proposal around the value of the EA function within your organization.
The first question is trying to get closer to understanding what the current challenges and opportunities for the organization are. What are the things that we're facing? And then how could EA be a part of solving those business problems or those business opportunities? Um, and that will help clarify what are the use cases that we should be looking at that might, again, not just be the APM that we put in place at the beginning. That's a really good starting point, but that might be uh, preparing and anticipating regulatory requirements or a cloud migration strategy or strategic planning after maybe changes in the organizational structure or following kind of different mergers or acquisitions or disruption around the setup of even the company itself. This might be sustainability preoccupations or security. So, what are these drivers? And for that, you got to be asking, these right questions. What are the drivers and the issues and the challenges that the organization is being faced today? uh, because the risk, I think, for when you have a EA that's limited is also that it's in its bubble and with the door closed, just excited that okay, we're doing what we're doing, and for us, and maybe we're the ones who see and we're really proud. But if we're not opening the doors and then going out and connecting back up with the big picture, which is the whole organization itself and where it's going, then we might not necessarily be contributing to that company project or that company need. So, in approaching in a more kind of comprehensive way, which does require having some guts, and again, sometimes not going where you were invited, but it starts like that, and then people get used to seeing you around and hearing you, and then it's easier to stick around. But I know there's like a factor for shifting the way we see ourselves and the way as enterprise architects and the role that we have to play to the whole company, but also to the ecosystem. I mean, it's got to shift ourselves and be a part of the change mechanism. So yeah, it requires a little bit of guts, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. And I don't know, I see a pattern evolving because, as we said many times, it's not technology, it's not the tools, it's not nothing, it's the damn people, right? And I think by stepping out of those precasted roles that people have, you make that next step. And JM, you mentioned it a little bit earlier when you said, "Oh yeah, that's organizational change management." But I think it's very important, and I know you have an opinion, obviously, on that,
Yeah.
how to approach people and get the people being involved and get the stakeholders and all those guys becoming not part of a target that you have to manage, but becoming part of the solution that you work
Yeah.
together.
And just stop doing things alone. You can't do it alone, and you're going to need, it's a scary word, governance, but you're going to need some governance, you're going to need some processes, but you most importantly, all that fits into a collaborative approach.
Mhm.
People love keywords like co-construction and stuff, but it's a real thing actually. Co-constructing, and a lot of people figure that out already with some agile approaches that allow, again, representatives for like key user representative, the business representative, the tech representative, and that they're like, wow, in the end, this really corresponds with what we needed, huh? So there's these approaches are possible on a smaller scale, but also on a larger scale, and I've seen a lot of qualitative results from that. I think it's really worthwhile.
Well, one thing I'll say, it sounds like you want to be bold and you want to be humble. And those
Mm,
two things put together
that's
give you the
nice.
power to be in the right places with the right people, but the grace afforded to others to trust that they're important in this process. And I think that that combination is really cool. And in particular, when you take a look at that humility of EA and talking to a variety of stakeholders, um, how do you identify which stakeholders are important and what they have to bring to the table? So, talk to me about some common stakeholders you might be looking at and the kind of profiles you'd be looking at for those stakeholders in a lot of EA use case challenges.
You need to pick where you're going to have the most visible impact and capacity for outcome, so that then you could say, let's replicate this in other places, and people be more willing to come into it. Yeah, taking chunks and then scaling up or out following that, but choose that chunk wisely. Choose it where it would really be visible but positive. It's not a random.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's also opening conversations with people you already are connected to, but don't know that's a topic you know how to talk about or that you could be talking about. You know,
I think that the challenge is when you think about it is, and this is the how section, right? Is, well, what's your perspective going forward, right? And I think you already made the case to say, hey, you need to look back and you look forward. But obviously, I have the question. Well, okay, I hear you, Leslie, but how do I do this?
sometimes when you want to imagine where you can go, you need to do this design process that requires to draw some pictures.
Hmm.
In the past, sometimes drawing pictures had a bad rap because it could have just be viewed as or used as a documentation tool that was quite stagnant. But I'm still convinced that for some things where automatic visualizations aren't possible, the human touch when it comes to design and conception is critical, and the capacity to communicate visually is indisputable. Again, the world is complex. You can't pretend it's not. But when you take an exercise which again is a requires experience of transforming the real world into its representation in a modeled form, so it's a representation of the real world in a simplified way, it allows to discuss with people who should be involved um, something that's more accessible to them that
Yeah.
otherwise might have been more overwhelming. to understand and analyze how things are happening, but also how they could happen differently, and working off of that. Now that's quite clear, and I guess you can map between what you see and what you get in physical context, industrial context, and things like that. But uh, the more we move forward, the more we see that same level of necessity for modeling and visualization is the same on digital activities and things that we can't necessarily capture. It's even more unreachable if we didn't uh, transform a little bit of that design. It's not just a list with columns. It has to have a certain constitution and relationships, and there's some human choice that goes on there. So as we're looking forward, it's necessary to lean on the capacity of modeling, I would say.
If I put on my product manager hat, I see a lot of tools where it's an afterthought, right? And then they don't have features like, oh yeah, I designed something going forward, and it's a one button press to say, okay, now I change it in my one of our database driven tables and whatnot. But
Yeah,
that's a side effect. But I think you raise a point, and I want to have one last topic in our conversation today,
sure.
because you mentioned it in the first part, and that's the concept of the digital twin. Because I
Mm.
think that modeling is a key part of that, because you need to represent your as is, what's actually going on. But there's more to it. So I'd be very curious to hear your opinion about digital twin. Is that even a thing? And if it's a thing, or will become a thing, well, how do you envision um, organizations implementing that? What are the elements of a digital twin that you need to put together? And where do you see the value of doing that exercise? Or is it just some nerdy stuff that some people invent some new terms and think this is the hardest thing since sliced bread?
Well, we've seen in so many different professions the need to not act on something in the real world just to see what happens. It would be risky when you look at science. There's just so too many domains to list them all out, and so having again a simplified representation of what's really happening in the organization, which is the organizational structure, how what the behind, I guess, this how the processes that deliver on the behind that, how that the organizational structure is delivering those processes, the different applications that are supporting those process steps, the technologies that are supporting those applications, the data that is vehiculed in each of those steps, the different operational risks at each of those levels, the structure even of the data that's underneath. Each of those different representations is allowing us to understand the way things work that you can't see as easily because it's just too big. It's like when you're inside your house, you can't see that the outside needs a paint job. Sometimes you need to step out. To step out, you need to be able to look at the big picture. So putting down all those bricks and then being able to step out lets us also put in place at those different levels indicators that are going to reflect back to the strategy that we were talking about before, like what things that are important to us or what initiatives we're trying to drive. And that lets us monitor, because sometimes we think of KPIs, which are performance indicators, but there's also risk indicators and control indicators. And so that's kind of an angle that the digital twin can allow us, which is facilitating the monitoring and the management around this big picture. So we
Yeah.
lets us do a bit more of the plan, do, check, act loop, or even if we want to go further, the ADM wheel from TOGAF, where if we're looking at the different perspectives, but then doing something with it. When you look at the full wheel, half of it is what you're doing with it, and you can't do that just on the fly with what's visible just in front of you. It's just too much.
No.
So that when I think of a digital twin, I don't think of a digital twin that is all the level of detail that you have in your in your reality, but enough that allows you to assess and monitor and predict and adjust and redesign uh, as you're continuing to move forward to, again, optimize the ensemble and not just a piece, and hopefully gain visibility to places where they might not have been for people who might not have seen it, and that those, again, the considerations would make in the end the decisions be stronger and
Yeah.
more meaningful and more purposeful for the collective.
Yeah, you talk about operational resilience as a sort of digital twin enabled capability. I completely agree. I love the digital twin concept for really the two reasons I care the most about it is number one is it's a communications technique. I
True.
mean, by laying it out, you've now created a town square within which everyone can operate. They see clearly how things work. You're sort of uncovering things and bringing the conversation to a level where you can actually communicate about what needs to change and how it needs to
Yeah.
change. And secondly, is I love digital twins as a mechanism by which you can sort of test the future business resilience.
True.
Like if I were to make a change here, would this work? How would it work? Would it make a change for the positive that I want to see? And how would disruption affect it? You can't test operational disruption on your real company without risking that the company
It's
falls apart.
messy and risky. We could try to avoid that. Some do,
Hmm.
some do. And I appreciate that I've been able to have many of my years with kind of the influence that America had on me, that France has had on me, and then working at Mega, it's very multicultural. There's lots of different, Italian people from Latin America and Germany, and so all these different cultures coming together and taking those strengths, because maybe when I was a young person, I was more likely to take the risk and see what happens after. I tend to kind of dive into it and then we'll adjust later. And maybe in France, the default might be a little bit more Cartesian, think a lot, debate a lot. And after we're super,
Hmm.
super sure, maybe do something. So I love that we can find a happy medium. And I think that the approach of a digital twin allows us to more safely take the speed that we're ready for, do the analysis we need without wasting too much time, and be agile at the same time. I mean, it really lets us find that um, sweet spot. Another thing is that when we're talking about this infamous digital twin, you mentioned something that was important about communication. I just want to amplify that. What you just said is that it's so important to communicate internally as wide as possible through like a portal, an internet portal of the company. When I was still a young project manager, but working with a large pharmaceutical company, they had a couple hundred people in the company for the different departments. There's industry, the industrial part of making medicine. There's also this clinical studies. Okay, so there's all different angles, and hundreds of people involved in EA, but the entire company access the portal that was describing the company's processes and
Yeah.
application network. I mean, it was for everyone, and even the process approach to how to go about doing your projects was described in the EA tool, and everybody who wanted to do their projects and how am I going to go about and what outcomes I will get, and kind of like the approach, everybody was consuming it that way. They didn't know it came from an EA tool. They didn't know it came from the EA department. They don't care. It's just this is
They
how we
don't.
do things here, and it was really helpful and
Yeah.
accelerated their time to value. And that's a part of when we say communicate on EA, make an EA culture. It's not just to shine the light on ourselves and say EA is awesome. It's that in the end, uh, good things are happening and we were enabling them. We were facilitating that. And I think it's really key that EA sees themselves as, how can I be an even more a facilitator today for the value in my company? Where am I putting those energies and that skill, that systems thinking skill, to that service? And I
Yeah.
think that there's
Facilitator for
people that would
value.
really enjoy it too, that would be proud to do that for their company. So I hope that people in our listen to us today have takeaways saying, maybe I'm going to take a risk and after this try something new, or go somewhere and knock on a door, and expand a bit, maybe a more limited approach that I've had up to now. That's what my hope would be.
Roland and I gave a presentation last year that I really loved, which was one that had a demographic breakdown. Remember, Roland, about the different types of people that we have on our EA tools and what we think versus what we actually should have. And I think a lot of people in the EA space think that it's all architects, designers, and analysts. And by demographic, the numbers are an order to 5 orders of magnitude more for the viewers, like, or 3 orders of magnitude more. It's like you might have 10, 15, 20 architects and designers. You might have 50,000 or 100,000 viewers for this. And that's a big difference. And that's the purpose of it. It's meant to be reaching a larger audience. And if we don't do that, what are we doing?
I think that enterprise architecture is also related to knowledge management in the sense that it's precious for when you have new hires and they're onboarding. They say, this is how we do things here.
Yeah.
The turnover you have in different positions is not what it was before. When I first got started, we'd be working for our direct business contact or our direct contact. And the person would have been running the EA department for years and do it for years after. They just kind of, that's like their place. That's not how it is now. The roles and responsibilities are often rotating. People coming in that didn't know the solution that got set up for them, that have to get onboarded quickly, and that might not stay around longer than 3-4 years. So having that representation of the way things are working and that it be not just documented but available in that way lets people hit the ground running and not waste time with saying, where are we, what do we do, how does this work,
Yeah.
at all different places in the company, not just in EA. So that's precious time we can't lose.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree, Leslie. By the way, you're just auditioning for the job of being the third moderator in this podcast because you did a perfect summary of what we discussed here. But I like to give our listeners a little break again. So take us out on a little break before we get to the next segment, which is obviously an interesting one. But think about, dear listeners, think about what you've heard in this second segment. How do you do things? What the digital twin means for you? How do you communicate? How do you provide that platform that Leslie was talking about, that everybody looks at it without saying, oh yeah, this is EA that delivered it. So how do you do this in your organization? And what does it take to bring you to that state that Leslie just described?
I'd like also to invite them to dream a little bit. What would having that overview of the system, what could that let you obtain? What could that let your company obtain?
Oh, absolutely. You're doing your moderator job perfectly, Leslie, but we still do a little break and we come back right after this.
And we're back. Thank you so much for sticking with us this whole episode, friends. It's been fantastic. But most importantly, Leslie, this has been amazing. Oh, my goodness. This conversation has been a real sort of getting at the heart of EA and moving past the limiting factors of EA, moving into an unlimited EA, moving into a holistic EA. I love it. So just, if you haven't been paying attention, don't worry, we have been. When we first talked about the limited factors of EA, on the unseized opportunities and the IT inventory is an excellent foundation for things, but ultimately we're looking to reach people. We're helping to expand perspectives, to plan and adapt to change, to provide the value to the organization, to be a leader in the excellence of the organization, to drive value using EA. And of course, the how is setting your perimeters, picking your use cases, asking the hard questions, reaching people and helping them manage expectations and understandings and the conversation around EA, and then taking that to actual measurable things, creating a digital twin of the organization, creating indicators that you need to be able to monitor and being able to show that value to your key stakeholders along the way, keeping in perspective all sorts of things like operational resilience and risk management. And this means that EA matters. It matters to your organization. It's a strategic capability, and ultimately you can help deliver value to people with EA. But that's our episode for the day. I'm sure people want to know a little bit more, though, besides what you've heard in the last hour. So my big question, I'm sure their questions as well, how can they get in touch with you after this episode to find out a little bit more and maybe make that tight connection to use EA in their lives?
Well, with pleasure. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and also professional organizations. So Mega and BizDesign are also present on LinkedIn and have websites. So take a look more there with regards to also our solutions, which reflect this holistic approach, and because we can be stronger together.
And with that, I'm super nervous right now because we're switching roles for those listeners who have not followed us before. With that, I like to bring us out. Thank you, dear audience, for listening. I don't have to repeat the usual stuff that you're supposed to do on the socials, liking and subscribing and all that type of thing. So you know what to do. But maybe more importantly, it would be great if you could do two things. One is reach out to us, right? Let us know what you want to hear us talk about. We have email that new stuff, it's hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. Just send us your ideas, which we happily take on. And then even maybe more importantly, if you like what you hear and see, tell your 5 best friends about the podcast, because the biggest thing that we want is to grow and get those awesome messages that Leslie just gave us over the course of the last 45 to 60 minutes. We want to spread the word even more. And with that, you obviously can find the show notes at whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 84. And I've been Roland Volt.
Leslie Robinet.
And my name is J.M. Erlinson.
And we're going to see each other in the next one.